Delighted to speak now to Mick Whelan, General Secretary of the Associated Society of Locomotive Engineers or Firemen, otherwise and much better known as the ASLEF union, which represents train drivers who were on strike yesterday and I believe are likely to be striking again this summer. Mick, good to speak to you this morning. We'll come on to the cost of living and Keir Starmer in just a moment. Firstly, just tell our listeners why your union was on strike yesterday.
Well, quite simply, we haven't had a pay rise for 3 years. There wasn't a massive appetite when RPI was low during the pandemic, and our people were busy going to work every day, 7 days a week, moving other key workers around the country, moving food and medicine, and doing, as we saw, as our duty for our communities at that time. Since then, we saw the people that we actually work for, because we don't work for the DfT and we don't work for the government, we work for privatised companies, make hundreds of millions of pounds out of contracts that they got through the emerging measures of the pandemic, pay dividends, yet not give pay rises. We also see the contracts they've entered into with the government, which we see as slightly dubious and corrupt, of a cartel agreeing with the government that the government will dictate what our pay rises will be in future when we don't work for them. So written into these contracts, apparently, is that they can't offer more than 2% without government permission. And apparently that's written into the contract in numerous places. We've got free collective bargaining. But then when we talk to the government, they say, and you've heard Mr Shapp say it many times, it's nothing to do with us, you've got to talk to the employers. So after months and months and months of banging our heads against tables and brick walls, we find ourselves in a catch-22 situation whereby the people that we're employed by tell us they can't talk to us about pay, and the people that they've done the contracts with tell us it's nothing to do with them.
How long should we expect this disruption to go on? How long do you expect these strikes to last, Mick?
Until we resolve the situation. I mean,
could be months, could be years.
I would hope not. I mean, I do live in the vain hope that normally, and if you look at my record in the last 20 years, it's been about trying to grow the railway, arguing for more investment, a greener, safer railway, integrated transport. And, you know, also we don't pay strike pay. So our people, for every day that they're out, they do lose money, and it's a real cost.
These strikes don't hurt Grant Shapps. They don't really hurt the rail companies. They hurt working people. They hurt small business owners. They hurt commuters. Is there not? Would you accept that that's the case?
I would accept that I don't want to hurt other workers. I didn't come into trade unionism 40-odd years ago. For me, it's about bringing other workers up. I would like other workers to have what we have. But I keep hearing this, and I've heard it for about 4 months now, before we had any strikes at all, this demonisation in the press of train drivers and what they earn. I like to put it to you that no one gives you something for nothing. We've given ultimate flexibility for the last 23 years under a model that we didn't particularly agree with. And that's been reflected in the salaries that we've generated. But why then should we sit back? Should it be 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, and watch that be eroded?
The figure that's given by the rail industry is an average salary for train drivers of about £60,000. Is that a figure you accept?
Yes.
So many of the people that you are disrupting through this strike action will be earning significantly less than that. They may well have not had a pay rise in the same period, and yet you are making their lives more difficult, despite the fact that your members are paid probably many times in some cases what those workers trying to get to work in the coffee shop, the restaurant, the hotel, wherever it is, what they earn.
And I've always found that an interesting argument, because when we said in the past, well, give the nurses 20%, give the fire brigade, give public sector workers more, we'll take a step back. Once created this debate about the politics of MB, that never actually happens, that often never takes place. So the reality is we don't engage the race to the bottom. We want every worker to have what we have. I'm frightened by in-work poverty. I'm seeing Royal Mail workers where at their places of work they've had to introduce food banks. We know that there's many people where there's two people working in a family having to claim benefits because of the high cost of rents and food and elsewhere. Well, not giving train drivers a pay rise won't solve that, but giving other people proper pay, right, in a cost of living crisis, and also allowing my members to look after their families who are some repeatedly impacted by this, because not everybody in a railway family is a train driver, right, is the right thing to do. And it's not just train drivers. We're seeing barristers, we're seeing across the whole gamut of workers everywhere, from lecturers. So we have this Tory government that talks about high-skilled, high-wage economy, yet that apparently is only going to be if we relax the relationship for CEOs' pay. It's not for anybody else.
But would you accept that if there is and you might challenge this, but if there is a limited pot of money for public sector for pay rises, that the priority for that should be low-paid staff in schools, in our police forces, in the NHS. It shouldn't be people like your members who are earning twice the average UK salary. And
I'll make this point once more. We do not work in the public sector. My people work for Arriva. They work for Trentalia. They work for First Group. They work for 14 different companies. 85% are partially owned or wholly owned by foreign state entities who take the money in the UK to sustain their nationalised railway. So you'd say it's their profits. It's not taxpayers' money that would be used. It's their profits that should be used to fund this pay rise. Yeah. For the last 23 years, and my people and I have worked in a privatised. Right, the fact that the government wants to take the wages of the privatised industry through the contracts they give. Right, is morally, ethically corrupt. Okay. You mentioned Grant Shapps, Mick. Do you speak to Grant Shapps? When did you last communicate with the Transport Secretary? Very early on in the pandemic, when it was all hands to the pump and we were seeking to do everything for the greater good. So you haven't spoken to him for 2 years? He doesn't have any any contact with the man responsible for our transport system? Not at all. Have you tried? We've called many times publicly for talks to happen, and every time he does so, he says it's nothing to do with the government. I've never spoken to the current rail minister, although I was offered one meeting and I was out of the country at the time, so I have to be fair, but that's one meeting in 18 months. So the government is effectively not getting involved in this. Someone else who's not really getting involved is Keir Starmer. What do you make of his positions on the current strikes, Mick? I publicly called out his decision on Sam Tarry during the week. I think it was the wrong one. But I do know generally he supports workers, and generally he has a policy that when Labour are in power, after 12 years of the economy being destroyed by the current government, that he's talking about growth and green transition. How would you characterise his relationship with the trade unions as we speak today? Mainly cordial, occasionally fractious. We are firm critical friends. People don't understand that, the Labour Party traditionally has been the political wing of the trade unions. That doesn't mean we get our way. The Labour Party is a membership-led organisation where many affiliates feed in, generate the policy, create the policy, and that does lead to difficulties through a period of change, obviously. Mick, good to speak to you. Got it there for time reasons, I'm afraid, but thank you very, very much for your time. Mick Whelan, General Secretary of the ASLEF Trade Union, representing train drivers whose members were on strike this weekend. Really grateful for your time.